Hello and welcome back to Anna Rose Reads the podcast. I am your host Anna and welcome back everyone. You get two times the Anna Rose Reads in 1 week because this is a bonus episode this week. I am so stoked to be sharing this episode with this particular guest. He is one of my most favorite people in the industry. He's one of the most creative people, most intelligent, and some of the kindest sentiments have come from this individual. This is a bookend to the previous episode that I shared earlier this week. That was with Nat Cassidy, and it was about his collection that came out with Shortwave Publishing, I Know a Place. But I wanted to talk to the guy who's running Shortwave. So I brought in Alan Lastufka to talk about his work. He's an author himself. I wanted to talk to him about his book. I read his book and loved it, so we talked about his book Face the Night. And just to get more background information on Shortwave. Alan is just so incredibly talented, intelligent, and well versed in everything in publishing. So to get his story and to kind of just sit down with him and unpack all that he's accomplished was a huge gold star marker of my year in interviewing. So I'm going to shut up now. I'll let you all enjoy this conversation. I'll check back in with you after. But needless to say, this has just been a banner week for podcasting, and I'm so excited. Hello, Alan. I feel like this is a gold star guest for me. I am so excited. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, this is Alan of Shortwave Publishing here to talk to us this evening. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you, man. I mean, I've been reading your books, reading the Shortwave's books ever since I got into the horror scene. I feel like, which was around the same time that like Killer VHS kind of, really got its legs. I think with Brian McCauley's Candy Cane Kills. So I feel like I've grown as a reader with Shortwave, which has been a really unique experience. But you, Alan, I feel like I've heard of so many ventures and things that you've been part of, just like kind of by being friends with you on social media. Do you want to go ahead and briefly introduce yourself and what you're about and what you do and who you are?
Sure. So my name's Alan Lastufka. I am the owner of Shortwave. I'm an occasional author. I am a very frequent graphic designer. And yeah, it's been an exciting life of projects. It started a number of years ago with a small indie record label. Because I was making videos on YouTube and I made a bunch of friends there, and my friends were all making music and uploading them to YouTube. And every comment under every video was like, "Where can I buy this? Where can I buy this?" And at the time, the answer was nowhere. And so I got together with my friend Hank Green, who's also an author, and his brother John Green, who's also an author.
Casual,
And we
casual.
started we started a little independent record label that sold CDs and t-shirts and posters and all kinds of cool stuff for YouTube musicians. And that took off. That blew up really quickly because it was fulfilling a need that was there. The need for it was great, and at the time nobody was doing that. This was back in 2008. So very early days of YouTube, early days of like indie merch where every creator can kind of have their own shirts and their own, like, that didn't really exist back then. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I did that for a number of years, and that went well, and so I ended up getting an offer for somebody to buy my share of the company. I took that offer, and that freed up my time for a number of years to start thinking about writing and start getting into some other things. And that's when I started taking a look at an author career seriously. Something I was always interested in. Did a lot of writing when I was younger. I did my own literary magazine in high school. I did my own zines in college. Like, I was always doing that kind of stuff. But I
Yeah.
never thought it could be like a serious kind of career path. Um, and that's when I sat down and decided, okay, I'm gonna give it a try. And so I wrote a couple of short stories, and then eventually started working on the novel Face the Night that we're gonna be talking about tonight.
Yeah, that's such a wild thing, man. Like that it's go like your creativity. I'm thinking in terms of like your creativity that has had these different like life cycles in so many different formats. It's just such a cool thing that you've kind of gotten to play with your creativity in these different ways, like with the music and now, obviously with publishing and books and then, obviously with Face the Night. And I do want to ask, like, what has
horror in particular, has that been a big part of your life the whole way through, or was that something that you settled on a little bit later? Like, this is going to kind of bleed into Face the Night, obviously, but just
Sure.
big picture, how did horror or speculative fiction or sci-fi, any of the things that Shortwave is about, like, how did that factor into your life?
I mean, it's always been there. I do remember at a very young age seeing Nightmare on Elm Street, and I don't know if it was, my older sister had a VHS laying around that I popped in one day, or what it was that I discovered it, but I discovered it at a very inappropriately young age, and loved it. Yeah, I loved the idea. I think even back then, not knowing it, I think I was drawn to the practical effects and
Hmm.
just the experimentation that went with it. And because some of them were so poorly done, you didn't even take them seriously as a kid. It was just kind of, oh, this is fun. This isn't, and like, yeah, there were the sleepless nights occasionally when you'd see something new and it would freak you out and get in your head. But a lot of it, I think, was a lot of fun. So I subscribed to Fangoria back then. I would check out the Stephen King books from the library, like, so I would say from the time that I was, maybe 7 or 8, it was just kind of like, this is where my interests lie.
Hmm.
And those kind of developed over time. I kind of branched out after that into a little bit more sci-fi. My stepdad was a big supporter in that area. He took me to see Alien 3 when it was out in theaters again when I
Hell
couldn't get
yeah.
in on my own. And, my mom was buying me tickets to Scream when I couldn't get in on my own, that kind of stuff. And so they knew that I kind of like loved this stuff, and they knew that it didn't bother me on a level like that I knew it was fake, that, I wasn't gonna mess me up or anything. And so that had always kind of been my focus, and like I remember going to summer camp one year and working on a short story then that was like a horror short story, and they were like, well, why can't you write stories that are pretty, and why don't you write about, butterflies and fields? And I was like, well, because nobody gives a shit about butterflies and fields,
It's not very fun. It's very
Exactly.
boring, actually.
Yeah, and so even back then I was like, oh, is this weird? Is this something I shouldn't be doing? But it's just always what's kind of drawn me, whether it's movies, whether it's even music sometimes with getting into some of the darker stuff there, like Pink Floyd's The Wall, or, some
Hmm.
of the Dream Theater, concept albums and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're about murder or isolation or depression or, these kinds of like very serious, heavy topics. And that's just kind of always where I've been drawn.
That makes sense. And I kind of get that. I mean, it didn't happen for me as young, but I get that appeal, like kind of, realizing that it's not going to scare you or mess you up too bad and finding some comfort in that kind of stuff. So I definitely get it. But I do want to kind of shift that into Face the Night and kind of like where that book started for you. Where did the first idea come from? I feel like it's such a basic question to kick off with, but I feel like you can gain so much about knowing where that first like little nugget of the idea started and then what it became for an author.
Sure. So the initial idea was, okay, I have this police sketch artist, and she draws the same face over and over again, no matter what's described to her. And that was the only idea I had. And I had this back in high school.
Hmm.
I was an artist back then. I went to initially Milwaukee High School of the Arts, which is a high school you actually had to bring a portfolio and apply to. It wasn't just, you got in because you lived close to the school kind of thing. And so I was very interested in drawing in my art career at that time. And so I was like, ooh, isn't this an interesting idea? Somebody who can only draw this same wrong face over and over and over. And then I did nothing with it for a long time. But when I started writing short stories and stuff, once I got, done with the record label and the YouTube stuff, the idea came back to me, and I was like, oh yeah, I had that really interesting idea about this thing. And so I then had kind of the inspiration of the moment of reveal in the book, which I'm not going to
Hmm.
spoil here, even though the book is many years old. But the moment that it's revealed, what is happening. I had that scene in my head, and I was like, "Oh my God, I love that scene so much. I'm gonna write the rest of the book around that. Like, I will come up with whatever I need to for the rest of the book to make sure that that scene happens." And I know sometimes people joke on social media about that stuff of like, "Oh, I have this one scene. Now I need to write a whole 90,000 word book around this one scene." But that's literally what happened with this book. It was like, I want this scene to exist. So what can I do? And from there, it was just a lot of outlining. It was a lot of playing around with options. It was, what can I do to make this interesting? What can I do to make this something that I want to spend my time reading and writing? that was kind of the inspirational nugget, really. And I don't know where that initial idea of the sketch artist drawing the same thing over and over again came from. Maybe it was practicing some comic book panels where I had to draw the same thing over and over again. But
Yeah.
it's like, oh, wouldn't it be hell to be stuck in this? When
Oh my
your
God.
job relies on you being able to draw something different the next day and you can't. Like, what kind of hell would that, So I think maybe it started there.
That makes sense. And I did take art, like the art elective in high school. So I kind of have a little bit of that, that I relate to. And I remember thinking, whenever I was like, Googling what I was going to do when I grew up, like you start taking career and aptitude tests and all this shit in high school. And then you get to standardized tests and you're like, okay, I got to figure out how I'm going to make money from the thing I'm interested in. And I remember one of the things that came up was like, what can I do with an art degree? And they're like, one of the things like very low on the list was a police sketch artist. And I remember thinking like, God, that would be the perfect job for me because I had a criminal justice interest as well. But it was just one of those things that I was like, yeah, I don't know if that's going to take with the way that, like technology is taking off and stuff. But the fact that you were able to write the story about something that I was even like remotely interested in at that time is so freaking cool to me. And your thing about not, like, can I not draw this thing? I can't stop drawing this thing is I relate to that so much because I feel like whenever you're in art classes or you're doing art projects, there's so much monotonous repetition to a lot of what you're doing that it will drive you insane. And I feel like
Yeah.
you captured a bit of the essence of that in this book.
Yeah, it's like you're learning vanishing points. So it's like, okay, let's draw a
Oh
cityscape
my God.
25 times. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, from this angle, from this angle. Yeah, yeah. No, I totally get it. But the other really cool thing about this book is that it is so many things. And I kind of saw that you posted on social media about this, but Face the Night is a book that is about a corrupt small town. It's about these characters that all have very, interior lives that feel separate from one another, but actually really aren't because again, it's a small town. It's about a struggling single mom, her Adriana, but everybody calls her Addie, is her nickname. It's about, she doesn't get along with her dad to like a very strong, extent, who is the mayor of this not so great town sometimes. So it's about like that family dynamic of drama and trying to make ends meet and, whether or not to believe yourself. This book is about so many different things. And I'm a little bit curious, how did you balance all of that and tie it up so neatly in the end? Because I feel like it would normally feel like a lot of balls to be juggling, a lot of things to have up in the air, but you land them all really fucking well. And I'm
Thank you.
so curious how I know that you said you have that one scene that you wanted to write about, but everything that you built around it is so well fleshed out. So I'm kind of curious how those extra pieces fell into place.
Sure. Well, honestly, I think the book should probably be twice the word count that it is if I really wanted to dive into all of the people. And I had to cut quite a few. In the initial version of Face the Night, instead of becoming the sketch artist, Addie gets sentenced to community service instead. And she has
Oh.
to teach an art class at the community like learning center. And so then she finds that like the other 15 students in her class are all sharing her dreams with her. And so there's all these individual characters that you dive into because they have their own lives and their own stuff going on, but they're all sharing this one shared dreams. And that just became way too big for me. This is my debut novel. That was too big to juggle. But out of that came, a smaller cast of characters, but still quite large for 90,000 words. Um, and a lot of it was just the outlining. I spent probably too many years working on this book because I wanted it to be perfect. So I initially wrote the first draft of this book as a NaNoWriMo. It was the first time
Oh
I'd ever
yeah.
done NaNoWriMo, and it was 2017. And I was like, okay, I sold the record label in 2014. I was like, so you've had a couple of years of farting around. It's time to get serious if you're going to do this. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit down for Nano. I'm not going to get up until I got my 1667 words, like every single day. And so I wrote the first draft that way. And that first draft, was very underwritten and you needed a ton of work. And I spent the time working on it. The book didn't come out until spring of 2022. So that was 5 years, 4.5 years, because it was as November of 2017. But so it was 4.5 years, and I didn't spend those 4 years working on the book solid. I did a lot of other things in those 4 years, but in the background, it was always, hey, let's work on Face the Night for a while, and like, hey, let's maybe revisit this thing. And so a lot of the landing of all of those plot lines was just having the time to consider, Okay, what is going on in the mayor's life and what are the steps we need to take to get him to where he's going? What's going on in the congressman's life and what's going on in his wife's life and each of the characters kind of taking those and laying out their threads and then being able to weave it all into the book. And the way that, it got weaved into the book was really just a lot of very short chapters that change points of view,
Yeah.
which has come up in some of the reviews as a negative. It's not exactly head hopping, although a lot of reviewers call it that. But it's I think it's 72 chapters long, so they're basically 1,000 word chapters with a couple that are a little bit longer, and that allowed me to kind of approach the book like it was a movie because I could show anybody in any scene, even if it was very short. If you need to know that one person was driving across town somewhere else, I could write just 500 words of that and then cut to somebody else. It didn't have to be a thing where we had to live in that character's world for more than those 30 seconds that I needed to get it across that hey, that character is traveling to this place and you can expect them to arrive soon because I've shown you that they're traveling there. And yeah, I think it all just worked out from there.
Yeah.
Maybe not the most eloquent or complex thing, but it was really just approaching it more like a film almost in my head, and just being able to cut to the important stuff when I needed to cut to it.
That makes sense. And I do think it's a very efficient method of storytelling. But what I do really appreciate, though, is, and I felt like, the closer that you get to the end of the book, obviously things are ratcheting up, the stakes are getting higher, we're learning more things, and things are feeling more dangerous because we have more knowledge. Your chapters do get a little bit punchier. And I really, really appreciate that because it's like you want to flip the pages faster. You're like, let me get to the next chapter. Let me find out what's going on. So I feel like there was a consciousness to that, on your part. And I'm not sure if that's me reading too much into it, but I do feel like there was a tempo to this book that really kind of increased the closer that we were hurtling towards the finish line, that I really appreciated. And I think, the best thing about small town stories, and in particular small town horror stories, is getting that head hopping exposition because it just shows how the wrongness is widespread. Like it's not just in our character's head. And I think that goes a really long way for Addie in this book, that we see. So that's a really interesting observation. I do want to zoom out a little bit though, because this is the book that led to Shortwave, correct?
Yes.
So what was that, like exteriorly away from the plot and all of this? What was that like for you and kind of how did you land at that decision to do that?
Through the time that I was writing this, I was kind of learning how to write. Like
Yeah.
I said, I'd done a lot of stuff in high school and college, but it was very uneducated writing. It was just kind of, oh, I feel like telling a story, so I'm gonna tell this story. So when I sat down to work on the book, I was like, okay, well, I need to take a lot of writing courses, and that came in the form of reading other books. That came in the form of watching a bunch of YouTubers who had done like AuthorTube,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
everyone had self-published and talked about stuff. And I realized through watching all of that traditional publishing probably wasn't what I was interested in. I want too much control. I want to be able to design the cover. I want to do the interior layout, the typesetting. I want to control how it's marketed and when it arrives and what formats it arrives on. Like I wanted all this control. So I was like, okay, I'm going to self-publish. And when I made that decision, I was like, okay, but I don't want the spine to say published by Alan, So I was like, okay, so I need a name for this publishing company that this totally was when I set out was only going to be a vanity press. It was just going to be I need a place to put my work, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And Shortwave was the name of the LLC that I had as kind of an umbrella LLC because I was still getting royalties from the record label. I had still had releases through there. I had done one nonfiction trad pub book way back in 2008, 2009. It was about how to get popular on YouTube because at the time I had one of the 100 top subscribed channels, which back then only took 40,000 subscribers, not 40 million subscribers.
Yeah.
So O'Reilly had me write a book about that. For them. So I had this LLC that was just kind of sitting there collecting little bits of royalties from lots of little places. And so I was like, okay, Shortwave, that's a cool name. I'm just going to use that for the publishing company too. And I wish there was a cooler story to it. I wish there was a sexier story to it, but it was really just I already had the LLC and it sounded good, so let's slap that on the spine. It wasn't until Face the Night did really well for a debut self-published novel that I decided to expand Shortwave to not just me.
Yeah.
So I had read before releasing it that most indie books don't sell over 100 or 200 copies. It was somewhere out there was a stat and it was that
Mhm.
number. And I was like, okay, so I really want to do well with this. I'm going to set that as my goal for just pre-orders. Like if I can hit just pre-orders, of the number of books that most indie books can't sell, I feel like that would have been a success. I needed to
Yeah.
define success somehow. That was going to be my pre-order success. We blew past those numbers in pre-orders, which was fantastic. And then it got a starred Kirkus review, and that's when people really started paying attention. Libraries were ordering copies. Barnes and Noble back then still ordered print on demand books, and they ordered it. There was a shelf talker for it and everything. We, I ended up selling thousands of copies of this book, and at that point, I was like, okay, I can do this for other people, because, part of it was I know I'm a slow writer. Whether it's a short story, whether it's a novel, I know I need a lot of time. So if I want to stay in the public consciousness, I'm probably going to have to publish other people because if it's just my stuff, okay, you'll get a book every 3 to 5 years. That's not a great way for people to remember who you are. And so a couple months after Face the Night had come out and I'd gone through it, it won the Hoffer Award for Best Commercial Fiction. Eventually, Kirkus put it on their 100 Best Indie Books of the Year list, which was just huge again for it. While all that was happening, one of my oldest friends, Nicole, had posted on her blog that she had just finished writing the first book in a cozy mystery series, but she didn't know what she was going to do with that book. She didn't really have any connections to publishing, or she didn't have an agent. She was a freelance writer at the time, but she was mostly writing short articles for magazines. A lot of like credit card stuff and financial advice and that kind of stuff was kind of her bread and butter. But she had this cozy mystery novel, so I was like, hey, I'd love to read that. She sent it and I thought it was great. And she said it was the first in a series of 4 planned books. She sent me the outlines for the other 3 books. It's like, this is fantastic. Let me publish this. Like I have this small press and I'm looking for other books to sell there. And that was how we brought Nicole on as our first author. That was how Shortwave expanded into a title that wasn't just mine. Looking back, it's a little off-brand from what we do now. We don't really have any other cozy mysteries or anything like that. But despite the genre, they're fantastic books. We ended up publishing all 4 of them. And unfortunately, I didn't know how to market cozy at that point. So they didn't take off and sell the same way that Face the Night did. But they got publishers weekly reviews. They got editors picks from Book List, I think it was. It's a couple of years ago, so I'm a little fuzzy on that. But yeah, like the feedback was fantastic, but
Hmm.
the sales necessarily weren't. And I think it's because I had spent so long building a horror audience,
Yeah.
they just didn't want a cozy mystery. It just wasn't something that they were vibing with. And I was like, okay. So at that point, I switched gears and had put out a call for novellas and novelettes because I was like, okay, I probably want to chill on the novels for a while. They're really expensive. Editing
Yeah.
is more expensive. Printing is more expensive. Like everything is more expensive about them. I was like, let's try something smaller. And I also thought it would be a good way to kind of introduce myself to the horror writing community, kind of let other writers introduce themselves to me. So that call went well. It didn't do massive numbers, but I got some great books that way. And that's how I found Narcissus from Adam Godfrey. That's when I got Lindsay Kroll's novelette,
Yeah.
Have You Decided Your Question? I got like these really great stories from these really great authors that I've gone on to work with some of them numerous times.
Hmm.
Um, and that was then how Shortwave started rolling because it was like, oh, this people are responding to. Narcissus is something that people are picking up, and Have You Decided Your Question is something people are picking up, and that led to our one big release that kind of got everyone else to take us seriously, and that was Obsolescence.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It was an
Yeah.
anthology that we did on Kickstarter. I reached out to a lot of bigger names that probably not probably had never heard of me before then. I was emailing Clay McLeod Chapman, I was emailing Gabino Iglesias, and I was just like, hey, you guys want to send in a story for this? And normally that's something they would say no to. I was a brand new press. I had absolutely no street cred. They had no idea who I was. But amazingly, Clay signed on immediately. And
Yeah.
later, when I asked him why, he was like, "Well, I saw from your presentation, I saw from your graphics, because I had sent them like the mock-ups of the covers and all the
Right.
different.
Right. Yeah.
We did a letter to numbered edition, all this stuff. He's like, I saw that you were serious about this. I mean, this shit is good. And he later said that Obsolescence is one of the best designed books that he's ever appeared
Oh,
in. I was like,
it's
that's
gorgeous.
amazing. Thank
It
you.
is gorgeous.
And after that, then people started taking us seriously, and that's when we moved on to kind of become what we've become with the Killer VHS series and working with Nat Cassidy and working with Laurel Hightower and just all these fantastic authors.
Yeah. It's so incredible to hear you talk about this whole process because I think one, it you speak with a lot of self-awareness about what you knew that you wanted in your creative process and kind of like seeing that as a strength. And I think sometimes we're a little bit of our worst critics, but you being able to see like, yes, this is something I can do to help other people is such a cool thing. And then being willing to do it. Like that's part of it. And then the other half is like, yeah, let me do it. Is the other half, you know. And I think it's such an I understand where you're coming from on that, you know, wanting to have full say in your book and how it looks and how it presents. Because I've just, you know, I've talked to so many different people who are either tangential to publishing, authors, different kind of authors at different stages, different, you know, like whether they're big five, indie, everywhere along the way. And there's strengths and weaknesses to all of it, don't get me wrong. But I think being self-aware about what would benefit you as the creator and like the artist, which is like fundamentally what we all are at our core, right? We're all like really into to art and to making art and sharing art is really, really important. And you know, like that obviously comes through in the work that Shortwave does. And this does tie back to Face the Night because I do think that that's a big theme of this book for Addie. You know, it's her artwork, you know, that kind of saves her and curses her at the same time. And her self-awareness of what she's seeing whenever she sees this face over and over again is very jarring. It's very scary. But then once she, you know, like she's determined to figure it out, which is really, really refreshing and nice to see, you know, like a character that doesn't run away in fear or is not afraid to kind of be vulnerable with it and to, you know, sit with it. So I couldn't help but feel like there was a really like meta connection between the creativity in Face the Night and what you have created with Shortwave. Do you see that at all, or am I just like really getting deep in the weeds on this here?
I mean, maybe deep in the weeds, but also in a way that I think rings true. It's not something I had consciously considered until you'd sent an outline of some of the questions and topics, and I was like, oh shit, like maybe there's more of a connection there than I thought. But I think a lot of it just kind of comes down to writing what you know, kind
Yeah.
of. As cliche as it is, like I knew artists, I knew struggling artists. I I know single moms. I lived with a few as just roommates, kind of thing. So like, you we talked previously a little bit about her character and the complexity there and the realism there, and I think a lot of that's just from knowing, my sister was a single mom for a number of years. My roommate was a single mom for a number of years. I lived with those people on it daily and saw the struggles and saw, like kind of what happens when they're not in front of other people and how scary it can be, how frustrating and anxiety provoking it can be. Like, it's you're doing it alone and you're doing this really big thing alone.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine anything scarier than that. And I think a lot of that ended up in her character, and that's why I think that she couldn't be afraid of this face. She had to figure it out because it was standing in the way of her keeping her son, basically. And so at that point, it's like, I don't care how scary this is. I'm figuring you out, and yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I think that that determination, you captured that really well. And that's something that like just really pulled me into the story and like made me really, really appreciate Addie as a character. And you know, that's all happening, right, with her. But again, as I mentioned, you kind of juggle all these different set pieces with the town drama and like the things that unfold. And I mean, it's not just drama like, oh, I saw, you know, like Lucille make a face at the waitress, you know, like it's like legit, you know, like deep conflict with drugs, corruption, bribery, blackmail. How do you like, those are the very real horrors that I think of in our day-to-day life. And yes, Face of the Night is a horror book, and there are otherworldly horrors that we won't, you know, get too deep in because I don't want to spoil anything. But how do you kind of balance the two? You know, because I do feel like the real life horrors of this book really shine through in that small town horror aspect.
Well, thank you. I think that it just kind of came from behind the scenes of
Yeah.
religion and business and nonprofits, especially
Hmm.
growing up, because my parents worked in some of those areas. And so you kind of get to see what happens at the old folks home when they close the doors for the night. You kind of get to see what happens at the charity when they're not on camera talking and they're not trying to sell their points, and you kind of get some of the a peek into that back room. And I never experienced anything as dark as what's in the book, obviously. But I think that just kind of knowing that that world exists and that that world is a little bit more real and it's full of flawed people who, maybe all might be trying to do the right thing, but their idea of the right thing can be very conflicting. And so I think just having that awareness and that experience allows me to kind of imagine like, okay, in this scenario, what's the most damning thing that could happen? And if that damning thing is blackmail, or if it's a bribe, or if it's, hey, I know that you're hurting and I know that you abuse substances. I'm gonna give you all the access to the substances you could have because I know that that's gonna fuck you up. Like that is, a reality that happens. And so
Yeah.
I think that then I can put that in the book in a way that feels true, and not that it's there for convenience. It's there because that is a possible scenario of what would have happened in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it speaks to the real world horrors that like we know that there's the possibility for these things to happen, that there are people who will think like that and will take advantage of a situation that way. And so I think that there's a lot of horror that thrives there in that space, but then also pivoting, I do want to look at the otherworldly, supernatural, paranormal, like whatever you want to call it kind of stuff. There's a level of like kind of like sleep paralysis, nightmares, the horror kind of crossing the line between what's real and what's not. And it's one of those things and it's great that you brought up Nightmare on Elm Street because it felt very Freddy Krueger, right? Like we can't tell when we're awake and when we're asleep kind of thing. But it's a really fun space to like thrive in horror. Like it's something that I come back to time and time again. Like I am a sucker for sleep paralysis stories. What do you think makes this particular, and it's not like a subgenre, but kind of like theme archetype so rife for horror? Like what makes it so fun, and I say fun or interesting or whatever you want to call it, for
Sure.
horror to kind of like play?
Um, Personally, I love it because there's something inescapable about it. When there's a killer loose at a camp, you can just not go to camp. When there's a killer loose in space, you can just not go to space. You can't not go to sleep. So when there is a danger in sleeping, as there is for Addie, that becomes scarier because you know it's unavoidable. You know that she can delay it, but she can't escape it. And I think that becomes a theme of a lot of these stories. It's not certainly not an original thought, but it is what's so scary about Freddy compared to any of the other slashers because you can't avoid him. On Halloween you can hide. None of the characters do it very well, but you could, and you could survive. But you can't hide from sleep. And then I think the other side of that then is once they are asleep, rules don't matter anymore, kind of.
Yeah, that's so true.
In a way that like you have freedom to do things that you couldn't do in the real world without setting up all kinds of magic systems. And you can say, well, it's happening in a dream. So if I say that gravity is reversed and everybody's walking on the ceilings for this one scene, you can do that without having to have an entire book about gravity being reversed. And I think that just makes it so fun for readers. It makes it so fun for writers, because it is kind of more of like this playground where it's like, yeah, the rules kind of don't exist here. The rules are whatever I say it is for this scene. And like obviously you don't want to abuse that and confuse readers. And you don't want to use it to do things that just, wouldn't make sense. But I think that when used responsibly, it's a lot of fun.
No, for sure. And genuinely, I mean this when I say this. There's a scene, there's like a dream kind of sequence-ish, and you have like one part where somebody like kicks their leg in a car and it like goes through the back of the car, like the seat in front of them, and they're like, I pulled it out of the void is like the next line or whatever. And I'm like, that's such accurate dream logic. Like that is so very much what dreams feel like in this, like anything is possible and you just kind of go with it. You don't really ask why, you just that is a dream. So I really, really appreciated the kind of atmosphere that you built with these dream sequences and like kind of really how terrifying they are because of how really real they felt. And I want to kind of ask one big final philosophical question, if you will, about Face the Night and kind of with Addie's story, just because I really appreciated the way that you told Addie's story, and the realness of her struggles and, like her determination to get to the bottom of things and, be with her son and all that good stuff that we've kind of mentioned already. But how has writing Face the Night and Addie's story in particular kind of like guided you or maybe influenced you in doing shortwave and reading other people's stories and all that you do with like kind of deciding what makes it into shortwave and the stories that you really, really look for?
Well, yeah, so with reading submissions, it's really it has to appeal to me first.
Mhm.
And foremost, it has to be something I just think is exciting. And then after, is this exciting? It's do I care? Because if I care, then I can sell it to other people. I
Yeah.
can talk about the good elements and whatever of it. And that's why we have such a varied kind of lineup in our catalog. We have some dark sci-fi, we have some thriller, we have a lot of horror, kind of stuff. And I think it's really just finding those characters that feel real and feel exciting. And Addie kind of felt that way to me. It was she represented a lot of the people that I knew in my personal life. Yet she was doing all these thrilling things that maybe some of the people in my personal life couldn't or would never have to face, hopefully. But it allowed her to kind of take control of her life in a way that we don't normally get to in our own lives, as much as we might want to. And that is exciting. And so I like finding characters that way, or stories that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm really glad that there's almost like that Face Night is the nexus of shortwave. It's a really cool thing to kind of see. And I kind of want to talk a little bit more about shortwave and the publishing side of things now to kind of move a little bit away from the book. But, you know, shortwave, I feel like in the last 2 or 3 years, has just really, really grown. And I'm very curious how it all feels from your side of this because, I'm sitting here as a reader and as a fan and as somebody who is like a huge fan of what you've created, what you're doing, and how it's grown and the direction that it's grown. But kind of like, how has it felt for you for the growth of shortwave in this way? I mean, like we're talking like literally, you were about to publish a book with introduction from Stephen King and is getting an exclusive edition, special edition from Barnes and Noble. So like, but how are you, I guess just big picture, like how are you feeling?
Extremely excited and extremely burnt out at the
Yeah.
moment. Um,
Yeah.
but no, it's been incredible. And like, so I had the record label success, and so it's hard to not, when I started Shortwave, it was hard to not have the same daydreams. Now you know how, at least I know how rare those things happen, and I was like, okay, I hit, lightning in a bottle once, it's not going to happen twice. Um, and while the publishing company has not reached the level that the record label has had yet, we are certainly on track there. It is very exciting. It's been 3 years of frustration of feeling locked in a box because we had self-distribution, we which no bookstore would touch you now. I came in with Face the Night at like the last 2 months of Barnes and Noble carrying print-on-demand books, and then
Mhm.
they just stopped. And I had all those orders, and then they just stopped. And then no matter how much I banged my head against the wall, I couldn't get them to carry anything we published after that. Um, which was disappointing because I thought, hey, maybe each book would have the shot that I had, and maybe each book would do, kind of what Face the Night did, and unfortunately that hasn't been the case. Um, and it's also been 3 years of kind of having to learn everything, like tough lessons, because I was not a published author before this. I've never run a press before. So there's a lot of things that I just didn't know. I didn't know you had to have 3 years of sales before you could even approach a distribution company. I didn't know that when I started. I might have taken a slightly different path instead of, jumping on, hey, we're going to publish 12 to 15 books a year. If they needed to see sales charts, okay, well, maybe let's just take 5 books a year. Let's do really well with those 5 books, and let's save the 15 books a year for when we get distribution, because
Yeah.
it does seem like sometimes the books that we did earlier didn't get their fair shake. Like we can do as much as we can for them, but if bookstores just can't order them and aren't going to carry them, well, then it doesn't matter how well we do with them. The readers can't find them, and that's the biggest problem. And so it's been 3 years of hard work. It's been
Yeah.
3 years of working really long days, and not making any money at the end of the year. We sell a lot of books, but this is all really expensive to do. Especially print on demand, the cost per book is just incredibly high, compared to what we're now able to do. Sorry, this is a really sad, depressing story, but it's getting
No.
better, guys. I promise. um, and so it was 3.5 years of this until we got our distribution deal with Simon and Schuster, which we signed in the fall of last year, and which just kicked in on January 1st of this year. And so our first releases with them are coming out in literally 10 days. 10 days is our first release. So by the time you guys are hearing this, the first few books will be out, because we do have 15 titles coming out this year over the next 9 months. So there's gonna be a lot. But yeah, now we're at a place where we have to do print runs. They're not going to accept POD, so it's like, okay, so let's print 2,000 copies of this book and hope that they sell. But the nice thing is now you're only paying, a very small amount on a per book
Right,
basis versus
right.
what you were on print on demand. And now bookstores will happily order them. We're in the same Simon & Schuster catalog alongside Stephen King and alongside all the other folks that they publish. Our books are listed there. So, the store's not going to really know much of a difference when they go to order. And so now every book that we release does have that potential to do what Face the Night did, and to get into those Barnes and Nobles, to get into the even just the indie bookstores across the country, around the world. Each one of our contracts is for world, and so we sell in Canada and UK and everywhere else. And it's all very exciting right now. We're it's a little difficult to talk about because we're at that cusp where we haven't yet made any money doing this,
Yeah.
but I can see all of the sales coming in, and they're all just kind of sitting there on the back end. So it's like the promise of
On the
profit is
horizon,
very
yeah.
high, but it hasn't actually happened yet, kind of thing. So I'm hoping the last 3 years were worth it for me, for our authors, for all of our future authors. Obviously the wins we've gotten recently have been huge.
Yeah.
The Barnes and Noble Special Edition, the exclusive edition, never in my wildest dreams would I think that that would have happened. And we just announced it yesterday, so the excitement is very fresh. And yeah, it's one of those things where we pitched it through Simon and Schuster. They set me up with a contact at Barnes and Noble, and they're like, you can maybe pitch 2 or 3 books a year. You don't pitch every book. We're very selective about what we take, kind of thing. Um, and so I was like, okay, well, I've got this book that we know is going to be a big deal, and that is a big deal, and it's really, really fucking good.
It's really, really
Um,
good.
you know, and I was like, and this whole time I'm just meeting everyone at Simon Schuster. I'm just getting set up in their system. I'm just getting introduced to my rep, and I tell her like, look, I'm not some crazy guy. I'm telling you this book is special. I'm not going to tell you this about every book, because I was really like overselling it because we had gotten into there so late in the game. It was like our books for summer when
Hmm.
this book is coming out. Technically, the metadata was due last year, last fall. The
Yeah.
metadata was due in their system. Well, we hadn't even signed our contract at that point. So I was like, okay, like we only have 4 months to make this a hit. We don't have the standard 9 to 12 months kind of thing to make this a hit. And it worked. They started paying attention. And, then Barnes and Noble was like, yes, we are interested in this. Can you give us anything exclusive? And I was like, well, I'd happily design you another cover. Like, I love designing covers. Let me design 5 different covers, and Nat was like, yeah, I have a couple other stories sitting around. And it
I'm
all just
sure
kind
he
of clicked
does.
into
Yeah.
place. It all just kind of clicked into place and was very exciting. And then, obviously the Stephen King introduction was huge, and something that we weren't sure we were going to get. He agreed to read it, and I sent him a copy, overnighted him a copy because we didn't want him to wait one more day than he had to. Um, and then it was just kind of, okay, now we sit and see if he likes it. Hopefully he likes it, kind of thing. And yeah, and it's not just that. The nice thing about so our sales refresh every day, overnight. The servers only update once a day, so I don't get to see the sales as they come in, but every morning I get to refresh the portal, and I get to
Yeah.
see the sales that came in the previous day. And the nice thing is they're not just all Nat's book. We're getting sales on every single book. We
Hell
have a
yeah.
poetry book coming out in May, and I was like, we've never done a poetry book. Poetry doesn't sell, but like I liked this poetry book, and so we're giving it a shot. And I just the other day we got like 300 pre-orders from one store, and was like, oh my God, like these are actually moving, and
Yeah.
that's all thanks to no longer being locked inside that box. And you you can tell I haven't rehearsed this because I have no idea how this is coming across to everyone. But
No, no.
it's been a big journey, and it feels like we've kind of been shackled for 3 years, and now I
Yeah.
just took the first step without those shackles. And so it's like I know this great journey is ahead of us. I can't really speak to it all because I don't know where it's going over the next few years, but already we can feel that sense of weight being lifted and the next step being easier and easier. And Simon and Schuster has gone above and beyond so far in the supports they've given us, which I wasn't sure what to expect because we are technically a
Yeah.
distro client. We're not an imprint. We're not, they don't own us. It's just they've agreed to sell and distribute our books. So that could be as easy as them just saying, yeah, you have access to the system. Go ahead and go, kid. But it hasn't been. It's been, hey, let's have a meeting and talk about how we can get a table at this bookstore. And hey, let's have a meeting and talk about how we can set up your author on a little mini tour over here. And it's just stuff that I wasn't expecting when we initially signed on. So I do want to sing their praises because they have been so far amazing. And like I said, we're just getting started. Our first title comes out in 10 days. So
Yeah.
I'm extremely excited to see what happens after that.
Absolutely. So this is the exact conversation that I wanted to have with you, by the way. Like this is it. Like we're having it. And the thing that I kind of want to go back to is to talk about the hard 3 years a little bit before, and like your enthusiasm is so like inspiring. Like you're like making me want to be like, yeah, I want to go publish a book now. You know what I mean? Like I want to, it's so infectious. But I want to talk about the hard 3 years because this is the thing that really sticks out to me as with you as a professional working in the space is that you were somebody who you were very generous with your knowledge. Like on social media, you share the things that you learn or you share like little tidbits that really enrich this experience of interacting with books. And like one of my favorite ones is people were talking online about how the feel of the killer VHS books felt like Goosebumps books. Like they felt like the older books that we had all come to know and love. And you were like, yeah, I hunted down like the closest kind of paper. It's this paper. Like you told us. And I have to imagine that being that deliberate or intentional with your products as you are like with a lot of your things, whether it's design, like layout, like all that kind of stuff, would not be easy during a hard 3 years without this kind of success. So I wanted to talk about like how did it feel like or just I want to talk about that intentionality even though it wasn't easy, because that's really something.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know and recognize and talk about all the time that I am definitely in a place of privilege coming from the sale of the record label.
Hmm.
That gave me the money and the time to do
Yeah.
these things. That bankrolled everything that Shortwave has done up to this point. Had that sale not happened, Shortwave would not have happened. Like there's just no way I would have the time, the money, the energy to put into a project this large. This is 15 books a year on a from a one man press is a pretty insane rate
Hmm.
to release stuff, especially because I'm doing the covers, I'm doing the interiors, I'm doing the typesetting, I'm doing the marketing, I'm doing the social media, I'm doing the reading for acquisitions. Like it is everything that goes on behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. And um the only two things that I contract out, I definitely want to give a shout out because I don't want to take credit where credit's not due. I do contract out line editing and I contract out proofing. I
Hmm.
think my eyes would bleed if I
Oh,
had to go in and
absolutely.
proof a book and worry about every punctuation mark and everything. But I have a extremely talented proofer who does go in and look at every single comma and punctuation mark. So yeah, it's those are the two areas in which I contract out help, but everything else aside from a random cover here and there that somebody else that I hire somebody else for because it's usually just in a style that I can't do.
Hmm.
I'm not an illustrator, so the famous example are the killer VHS covers. The illustrations on those are done by somebody else because I can't. That's not a style I can work in.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I definitely want to, acknowledge that this is not a path that I can recommend for everyone because you have to have the time and you have to have the money to be able to take 3 years of not earning profit, and that's just not a reality for a lot of people. Um, and I think that I appreciate it so much because I didn't come from a family of money. I came from parents who were both in debt. I came from living with I mentioned the roommates earlier. I lived with roommates until the record label took off and I could afford my own place. So for almost all of my 20s. Trying to timelines are weird, but until I was like 28, 29, I lived with roommates because that's all I could afford. And it was sometimes it was borrowing 20 bucks from mom to eat on that last day of the week before paycheck kind of day. And so I started the record label working after my full-time job. I was going to a full-time job
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then would come home and pack the CDs that were in boxes at the foot of my bed in the one bedroom that I rented from somebody else in their house. It was like, so I kind of want to set the scene that like this isn't, and so I think that's why I appreciate it so much, because I know what it's like to not have it.
Hmm.
And so now that I have that time and that security, it allows me to have those hard years where it's like, okay, I'm gonna work 10 hours a day and I'm not gonna get paid for it, but I'm gonna make something really fucking cool at the end. And that's what has driven me. And thankfully, a lot of authors have shown up and shared some really cool things with me that I've been able to publish and been able to work on. Um, and hopefully now the next step is, now I can get paid. And
Yeah.
now our authors can get paid, even more so than they were before. And we can just keep doing really cool projects.
Yeah, and for me, like whenever things are difficult, like whenever you are working the full-time day job and then you're coming home and doing the extras for the side gig, cutting corners is so fucking easy.
Mm.
And so like the fact that you don't, whenever you care that much, I really feel like that has earned so much of, in business and marketing and accounting, they call it the goodwill of a company. You can't put a dollar amount on it, but that is like it's so easy to see with shortwave, and I feel like that's where like I want to support shortwave because I see the detail, I see the work, I see the attention to detail to that kind of thing, and it's so important in a world that is like increasingly getting less and less unique. Everything's just beiging out and it's getting so fucking depressing. So like yeah, the kind of paper in that fucking book matters. Like that is what brings people joy these days. So I have a lot of respect and like I'm a little bit in awe
Thank you.
you've paid that much to and like gone through and done it in this way. Like it's really, really awesome.
For me, I've always taken the approach of, am I going to be proud of this in 10 years? Which is
Yeah.
such a weird thing to think even back when I was like 17, 18. I was recording
Kid,
little
yeah.
demos, with my friends in their garages and stuff. And it was like, well, could we try mixing that one more time? Could we get it? Am I going to be proud of this in 10 years? Like that kind of thought has always been in the back of my head. And I think that it kind of keeps me focused on these things of like,
Hmm.
I want an author to look back on their shortwave book, whether it was one of our PODs, whether it's an offset, whether it's a special edition, whatever it is. I don't want them to pick up that book 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and just be disappointed in it. I don't want them to look and see that corners were cut. Like there's no reason for it. If you're gonna do it right.
Yeah.
Is kind of my philosophy. And so
Yeah.
it sometimes that means late nights, sometimes it does mean using special papers, sometimes it does mean delaying a release, which we've had to do a couple of times to just make it better.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff. And you know, um, it's really just the pride in the work, and it really helps that I don't have a team of 10 investors, breathing down my neck about it.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
would make it so much harder. Like, so, I don't want to demonize everyone else who might have to cut some of those corners and might say, hey, the release date is this date, and we have to put it out by then, even if it's not finished to the form that we would like it. I get that there are different circumstances, but here it's just me. So it's like, if I want to take a release from April to June and make it better, then that's what we do.
Yeah. No, but I mean, but just mad props to all of that because Jesus, I know it's not easy.
Thank you.
But the other kind of angle of shortwave that I want to pivot to, and you've talked about it a bit with this, but it is the art direction that I am so fascinated by. And I know that you said like, like a lot of graphic designing, a lot of that stuff, like with Nat's thing, you're like, oh, I'll do 5 covers. Like you can't casually throw that around because that's a lot of work and a lot of vision. And I think in particular, whenever you're reading a story, there are obviously like set pieces that stick out. But like on the whole, I guess is what I'm thinking, whether it's covers or like interior design, like different things like that. Like what speaks to you most in a story that kind of gives you the idea for these things? Like obviously like like Nat Cassidy's rest stop and like now I know a place, the googly eyes are like a huge thing. Like you see that now and I can't not think of it. So I'm so curious as to like if there's like what you look for in a story that's like, yes, this is going to inform this art direction.
Sure. Yeah. So, Sometimes it comes right away. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes I get
Hmm.
something and I know exactly what the cover is going to look like before I even open Photoshop. Um, Other times it comes a bit harder. Um, but it's really so my formal education, my college was most people would call it graphic design, but it was actually called graphic communications. And so it was
Yeah.
about how do you tell a story with graphics is really what they were teaching me. And so book covers are so natural for that because it's like, okay, how do I tell a story with a cover? And sometimes it might not even be true to the story that's in the book. It might just be related and a feel of what's in the book, kind of. But it does tell a lot of the covers anyway, do tell their own stories. And, um, like sometimes it's a struggle. Crossroads is an example that I posted about recently.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
I had a vision for Crossroads of what I wanted to do with the cover. This is the book by Laurel Hightower. You guys should go pre-order it.
Yeah,
Actually, it
yeah.
might be out by the time this episode's out, but go buy it. It's a great book. It's a fantastic book. But I kept focusing on the wrong character that I wanted to feature
Mm.
on the cover, and so I was sending all these drafts to Laurel, and I wasn't feeling them. I knew they weren't right. She knew they weren't right. And like she was like, well, maybe try this or maybe try that. And I was like, yeah, well, we could do this and we could do that. And the whole thing wasn't working. I then decided after God, way too many drafts. We're talking probably 20 different drafts of this just not working. I was like, okay, I'm gonna focus on a different character. Let's switch to the other character. Immediately the first draft I sent her, she was like, that's it. That is the cover. And I agreed. I was so excited about it when I sent it to her because I was like, this is it. This is the cover. And so all it took was switching the character. And sometimes when your initial vision of what you want the book cover to be, it just isn't going to work. And you're gonna have to do that kind of switching. But I don't know if that if any of that answers your question, but it is something where I do try to find something iconic for
Hmm.
the cover because it is something that you're going to want to, they talk about how like the best supervillains or whatever are ones that work in silhouette. If you can tell a character by their silhouette, you have a strong, and this obviously this is visual arts kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and so I try to think of it the same way. If I could silhouette the book cover, would people still know which book it is? If I give you Rest Stop, but it's just the squares of cut out black pieces of paper on a white background, are you going to still know what that book is? Or Sundowner's Dance, if we strip away the titles and the colors and you have a glowing rock in the middle of a subdivision, are you going to know which book that is? And I think that you would. And so I kind of try to focus that way with the books. A lot of times my covers are described as clean and minimal, which are both words I'm okay with. Some of them have quite a bit of detail, but I do get where they're coming from compared to a lot of horror covers where you have a lot of the drippy fonts and you have a lot of the scritchy scratches and you have a lot of the fake aging of the paper and stuff. Like I stay away from a lot of that stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and just kind of design yeah, I guess clean and minimal, but more iconic is the word that I would use because it
Yeah.
sounds more positive. Yeah.
Well, I think I just feel like though, in terms of like looking at those words to describe your work, I feel like you're just trying to stay out of you're doing enough to let people know what they're getting into, but you want the story to do the work. Like you're not trying to overshadow, you know what I mean? Or like do more. It's hard to
Mhm.
kind of put into words what it's doing, but I get what people mean when they say that. But I think that a great cover, like you look at like very much the Sundowners Dance is one of them that you do recognize without the text and everything else around it. Like you see that and you know. Um, but it's one of those things that I think it's a real art, like much like editing. Like I feel like the way that you read changes when you're trying to decide art direction. And it's not and there's like no straightforward answer to it, because I feel like every story is so different, obviously, about like the things that will speak to you. So I love to hear people's creative process about how like they land on those things because I feel like it's so unique, human to human, obviously, and then story to story. So I feel like variably when you mix up those things, it's always really interesting to see how you land on that piece of iconography, like you say, like you want that one thing to be the fixture, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, well, yeah. So a lot of times I'll start with and I don't usually write it down, but in my head, kind of like a word cloud of some of
Yeah.
the things that I think about so for Nats it was about for I know a place, it was like, okay, we have travel, we
Hmm.
have places, we have access, we have roads, all of these kinds of things. And it was like, okay, so what what visual items can we use to kind of determine those, and that's where the kind of the key, the lock and key graphics kind
Yeah.
of came from, and then it's like, okay, well, what can we do? What interesting things can we do with those? What can we do to not just have a set of keys on the cover, or whatever. And that one went through very few iterations. It just kind of the keys on the strings. You could kind of have it like it feels like they're either hanging from the ceiling in some forgotten cabin, or even just a hook on the wall of like, oh, I know all these different places, and I'm the maintenance man with all the keys behind the desk kind of thing. You can have whatever kind of visions you like about that. And it just looks freaking cool. It was a nice way to get some red onto the cover, that kind of stuff. And then obviously we had to put the googly eyes inside the keyholes. There, no question about that.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then that comes, and that's how simple that cover is. Like, it's just a couple of layers. It's some googly eyes inside of keys on strings. Like, it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. I could have overlaid a map behind it. We could have done road signs all over the place. Like, we could have taken it to stupid places, but you kind of have to pull back from doing that. Like you said, not adding too much, not overcomplicating it. And I think that that's what's going to stand with folks. And that one in particular, I was talking about the silhouettes and stuff. We're embossing that cover,
Yeah.
which basically
I
means I
love
need to
that.
make an embossing map for the printer, and that
Yeah.
is just a black and white silhouette where black is where you want it raised and white is where you want it pressed in. And again, the cover works beautifully, even just as the embossing map, because like immediately you could tell what it is. And so we did that for both the standard edition and the Barnes and Noble edition, and it's just so fun to make those maps and just kind of see what it would look like when it's just broken down to the black and white iconography. And it's just, yeah, it was a really fun process doing that. But yeah, like I said, a lot of times it just kind of starts with the word cloud that comes either after reading the book, or sometimes I've worked on covers where I didn't even have the full manuscript yet. There
Mm.
was one book I really wanted after just reading the synopsis and like the sample chapter. And so when I sent back my pitch to buy the book, like in my offer or whatever, to or at least continue those conversations, I sent along the cover art as well. I was just like, I was inspired. I decided to put this together. Use it if you want, don't use it if you don't want to. But it was just, I think that it kind of shows a level of interest that a lot of other publishers can't show, just because they are not going to hire a graphic designer to make a cover to then send with it. But
Yeah.
it's something that I can kind of do in my free time, haha, free time. But it's something I have the ability to do, and so it's one of those things where maybe I can win out a little bit over somebody else if it shows like, hey, I'm serious about this. Like, I've already sat down and made the cover.
Yeah, and it goes back to though, like whenever I talk to you about, the stories that really speak to you and about, having characters that care, like to me to be struck with such a creative urge to be like, "Oh my God, I gotta go make that." There's no greater like compliment than motivating an artist. Like I think
Oh yeah.
if you can get an artist to move on something, you're onto something. So for you to feel that way about a book, I think that there's something that people recognize in that and being like, okay, if he's seeing it in this way, then there's something real there, because like I know for me, like any kind of art, like it strikes and it's gone 15 minutes later. So if you can move me to create something, it's pretty damn good.
Well, and that's part of the hope, yeah, is that and sometimes it is really just so exciting I want to do it.
Yeah.
And those are the books then that I know I want it. If it's like, hey, if this is making me this excited, like it's gonna make readers excited, it's gonna make reviewers excited, and at the end of the day, that's the name of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of want to pivot about this, but I'm a little curious about the one man nature of it. I know that there's so much that you juggle the burnout, like you kind of joked, but I know that it's very real. I know that there's a lot of plus sides to doing this by yourself because, like you said, you kind of get control and say, and you don't have like higher ups breathing down your neck to make these kind of decisions, either under the gun or like just, based on numbers that maybe don't matter and things like that. But like, do you ever imagine or envision that shortwave will grow to be bigger, or do you think that this will be your baby forever?
I mean, the desire is there to have it grow to
Hmm.
that kind of level. It's tough though, because
Yeah.
you're giving up a bit of control, and you're giving up a little bit of, right now shortwave is Alan is shortwave, and like I, I kind of I kind of get weary about when people are like, oh, I'd happily volunteer to run your social media. It's like, yeah, but social media is where my voice comes out. It's where I talk about these things. It's where I show, like I don't want to push that off on someone else. And so then I start thinking, well, is there any part of the job that I want to push off? And it's like, most of the time the answer is no. Like, yeah, some of the things get tedious, and some of the things it's like, oh, I really don't want to do this today, but it's due tomorrow, so I gotta do it today. Kind of, some of the stuff gets to that point, but thinking about big picture wise, there's not a whole lot that I want to push off. And that's actually why I ended up easily being able to make the decision to sell the record label, because when that started, it started in my literal bedroom. I was shipping orders, I was designing the CDs, I was designing the posters and the vinyl. But eventually, we got to a point where we were just too big for that. We had a 3,000 square foot warehouse. We had a team of 10 people. We had an art department guy that was working on. I didn't get to do anything but push papers all day by that point. I was like, what am I doing sitting here pushing papers at my desk? I hate this. And so I don't ever want Shortwave to get to that point. And I
Yeah.
don't think that it would. So,
Eh,
so
eh.
I'm hopeful. The few ways that I see it going, my ideal, and this is kind of like speaking your daydream kind of thing. Maybe it's dangerous to put it out there, but my ideal. So the contract with Simon and Schuster is for 3 years, and then it renews after that if we're both happy. I hope at the end of the 3 years, we've made them so happy they want to buy us as an imprint. And at that point, they would pay me a salary to be the acquisitions editor. And then they would take a lot of the admin stuff away from my side.
Yeah.
They would be in charge of paying royalties. They would be in charge of contracts. They would be in charge, like, okay, maybe that some of that stuff is stuff I wouldn't mind pushing off. And that would kind of be the ideal. Now, is that a reality? I doubt it. We'd have to really show up and really impress them, kind of thing. And I don't know how any of that works. I've never looked into any of it, but it's a daydream of hey, maybe one day they'll just pay me to do the parts of the job that I like, and they can take care of all the other crap. But yeah, I like again, it's hard not to daydream about those things, having seen what happened with the record label. It's hard not to think that like, okay, we're gonna be, really successful at what we're doing, and our authors are gonna love us, and we're gonna be able to make six-figure deals all the time. And you have those daydreams,
Yeah.
which are still very far from reality, but they are nice.
I totally get where you're coming from when well, I don't want to let go of like I so get it. And like you've put so much into this, and like you said, like you were shortwave is you kind of thing. So like I totally understand the wanting to keep it that way. And like this is why you're doing it. Like this is the purpose. So I totally understand that. But I know I don't think it's that big of a pipe dream, Alan. I really don't. If
Yeah,
anything,
I
we're
mean,
gonna say that we're manifesting right now is what I think we're
yes.
gonna we're gonna turn this as.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and I think about it sometimes and I'm like, well, I probably don't have enough years left to build, the next Penguin Random House, the next tour even, like those things took decades to build. Um, but if I can do something that's, half as good as what Tor's done, if I can build something that's like that, recognizable and that respected within their genre kind of thing, that's kind of the goal. Like, yeah, it's can we get to a place where we have published so many great authors that, when people say, oh, it's a shortwave book, that's all they need to hear to buy it. And I know
Yeah.
there are very few small people out there who will claim that that is already true, and that's fantastic. I love seeing it on Instagram. It's great. But to have that known in the industry, I think would really be like, the place to be, because the people we're working with right now are all fantastic. The books that we're getting to publish right now are all fantastic. And I hope that we can continue that. I hope that I don't lose the plot at some point, kind of thing. Because it's, God, I love working with the people that I get to work with. It is so
Yeah.
exciting. We were talking about the little bit of burnout and stuff, but like it all immediately goes away when I can get on a Zoom call with one of our authors and we can start chatting about ideas for promotion or some edits that they wanted to talk about, or, just really excited about this upcoming feature somewhere. Award season rolls around and we're thinking and talking about that. Like so much of that, oh, I don't want to do this, goes away the second we get on.
Yeah.
And it is very exciting.
Yeah. I mean, peaks and valleys is with anything, but I feel like the creative high that you get with talking to these people and like collaborating in this way is so I get it. Like
Mhm.
I felt like an iota of that energy in doing these interviews, and like getting to converse with people. So I understand where you're coming from on that. Um, And I kind of want to start wrapping up ish, but what is like one of the greatest joys that you would say that like shortwave has brought to you, and like whether that's like a story, like what do you want shortwave to be, and like what brings you joy about shortwave in that image, if that makes since?
Um, yeah, I mean, so much. But one of the things I think has been really cool, Patrick Barb does this interview series on our
Yeah.
magazine,
Yeah,
your
yeah, yeah.
favorite author's favorite author. Those are always so exciting to read because a lot of times there'll be authors I've read, authors I maybe even really enjoy. But hearing others talk about how inspired they are, hearing others talk about how much they've taken and learned from someone else's work and how they've twisted it and contorted it and made it their own and it has launched their careers. That's really exciting. That's an aspect of I could be a reader for the next 50 years and I don't know that I would experience that same feeling that I get from reading other authors talking about that. Um, it's one small aspect. It's a free thing that we offer on the website, but it's really one of those things where it's like I hear somebody talk about an author and it's like, oh God, yeah, I need to go reread those three books. I read those books before, but now they're going to mean so much more to me because I can, hear what they meant to somebody else. I think that's really cool. Um, just getting to participate in the industry, I guess,
Hmm.
for lack of better words, is just very exciting. It's very exciting. Today we got an email from the head of marketing at Scribner because they wanted to talk about the future participation by Steve in the promotion of I Know a Place.
Future
And it's
participation
like,
by Steve.
and like, where the hell am I going to get that experience outside of doing this? Like that it's going all the way back to, 10-year-old Alan checking out, the Green Mile from the library to today getting an email from his publicist and just casually calling him Steve. Like, it's one of those things where it almost doesn't feel like reality sometimes. You kind of have to
Yeah.
remind yourself these things are happening and you're doing these things and it's because of the work you've put in. This isn't make believe. This isn't, fake. It isn't just being handed to you. It's like you've earned this place, but it's also just like, holy shit, is this really happening kind of thing. And I seem to have that feeling like a couple of times a week. And it's just I can't imagine doing anything else at this point.
Hmm.
And like obviously, hey, what if I had stuck with just doing my own writing? Where would I be at this point if I could have built off of that first book, kind of thing. And maybe occasionally there's some thoughts to that, and that's definitely something that I would love to make the time for again. But at this point, it's just not a reality if we're going to keep up on the publishing schedule that we have and some of the projects that we're working on. But um, yeah, yeah,
It's such a cool moment to be, I don't know, a fan, but somewhat participant, but or just to witness in the community this thing that's happening. Because like, we saw it with Nat when he got blurred for When the Wolf Comes Home. And then like to have this now like be with Shortwave, like not to say that Steve King is always the metric of success in this community, but so many people, are just fans of him. And so whenever you hit a level of recognition by people, like these people who very clearly respect and like really love his work, to get that recognition back is just a really cool thing to see. And it's just so fucking exciting. Like it's just so hard to not feel really, really fucking good about this thing, this project, this book, these people who work really, really hard and who are getting this level of recognition. So it's been such a cool thing to see, like for you and Nat, and then just like with Shortwave in general. Because again, like I said, I hopped on right whenever Killer VHS was kind of cranking up. So to imagine, back then that this is where it would be, like for you, I feel like a little fraction of that. Wow, what a growth, what a 3 years, what a whatever. So I cannot imagine for you what that feels like. Imagine it's kind
yeah.
of overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the dust to settle and to have the 5 minutes to like really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Because it is kind of at this point on to the next thing. I know we're talking a lot about
right.
Nat in this podcast, but it's also because that is kind of our big release that's coming up soon, and it's where I'm spending the vast majority of my days currently. But yeah, I mean, with so many exciting things coming up and so many cool projects, and I feel this excitement for every single one of those, which is again, it is a gift and it is something that like I know how lucky I am to be doing this. I don't take any of it for granted. And I still get just as excited today as I did 2, 3 years ago when one of these authors emailed me for the first time. And, oh, I'd love to work with Shortwave. Can we talk about a project? Is there something, is there anything you're interested in working on? That is such a exciting moment when people are kind of searching you out for that, or when I email somebody, I'm like, hey, I would love to work on something with you. And they're like, hell yeah, let's figure something out to work on, kind of thing. It's like, it is really exciting, and to now have some of that stuff getting paid back after all those
Hmm.
years is just great.
Yeah, that I know it places my recency bias because this is my latest shortwave title that I've just read. But no, I'm very thrilled, and I love the treatment that like Laurel Hightower is getting with you guys with getting Crossroads put out. Like there's certain books that have kind of maybe existed elsewhere that too, like I feel like are getting a new life with shortwave, which is a really cool thing to see. But yeah, man, I'm just such a huge fan. I'm so pumped for you, like in
Thanks.
this whole thing. Do we want to go ahead and tease a little bit about what 2026 does look like? I'm not saying read off the whole catalog, but just some of the things that
Sure.
you're like really pumped about.
Yeah, so we are doing a few reprints, both things that were published by other publishers, but also things that we published previously that I think
Hmm.
just should have a second life. We're gonna rebrand the entire Killer VHS series and release that through Simon and Schuster, so that's available. Um, we're doing Sundowners Dance as paperback through Simon and Schuster, so that'll have a little bit more of um, a spotlight shown on it again. Like you mentioned, Crossroads. It was the first thing I ever read from Laurel back when I wanted to invite her to be part of Obsolescence. I was like, well, I want to read something first, and so I read Crossroad, and it was just like, oh my God, this is fantastic. Yeah, but we also have a lot of new titles coming up, and so we have a collection from Philip Fracassi coming this fall. We have a novel from Tyler Jones coming this winter. Gemma Moore wrote a great killer VHS book coming this winter. I'm
So
very
excited
excited
for that
about
one.
that.
Love
We
Gemma.
have a debut collection coming from Maisie Culver, who's the screenwriter for Hysteria on Peacock. Um, she wrote a great book called Of Monsters and Menzies that'll be coming this fall.
I loved Hysteria too, by the way. Like
Oh yeah,
underrated.
great show.
Like
Yeah,
fucking loved it. But yeah.
yeah, no, I had so much fun with that. Yeah, and then we're trying to branch out a little bit. We have a kind of horror children's book coming from Jamie Flanagan this summer.
Yeah.
Christoph Paul from Clash wrote two novellas that we're publishing in one bind up. It's gonna be a flip book, so you read first half and then flip it over and read the other half. Just a lot of fun stuff coming up. That I'm very excited about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like we say it every year, but like truly, great year for y'all's catalog. It's just really, yeah, I feel like it really has something for everybody. Like truly, like you said, like we're gonna have a flip over novella book, we're gonna have a children's book collections, novella, like all that kind of good stuff. But yeah, man, busy year. Is there anything that you wanted to maybe cover or talk about a little bit more that we didn't touch upon before we kind of wrap things up? I was going to ask you about your fiction writing, but you already answered that question that that you don't really have the
I
time at
mean,
the moment, but
yeah, so I can speak to that. I actually have a second book that is finished in the way that Face the Night was finished after NaNoWriMo, which means it is extremely underwritten and needs a ton of work. But it is done. It's called Dead FM. And
love
it
that.
thank you. It actually features two minor characters from Face the Night. The radio DJ and his producer are now the leads of Dead FM. And this one's unique. I'm just going to give a shit ton of spoilers here, not for the plot, but for the book itself. This one's unique because so the basic premise is there is a call-in late night show, and they have a ghost that calls in. And quickly the signal goes out, but then they invite other people to call in with their own ghost stories to kind of ride this wave of excitement over this ghost calling in. And I didn't want to write all of those calls from different people because they would all be in my voice. So I invited other horror writers to write those calls and call in with their own ghost stories. So Todd Kiesling, Cynthia Paleo, David Niall Wilson. I had a lot of people write these ghost call-in stories where I was just like, go crazy. I was like, the radio DJ is going to answer the phone, then you take it and do whatever the hell you want to do. Uta Orgasa and Tanya Pell are the last two. Sorry, I wanted to get everybody's names in there. I was like, okay, so the radio DJ is going to call, or you're going to pick up the call, tell your story however you want to do it. The DJ can butt in, the producer can butt in, just tell the story you want to tell and then hang up. And I'll take it from there. And so throughout the book, you have these different calls from different horror authors in there. I fucking love the idea and I'm so excited about it. And the draft has been sitting on my desktop for months and I haven't been able to touch it. And I'm so sad about that. So I will have a second book at some point. It will be called Dead FM. It will have ghost calls from other horror authors. Um, when is that coming? I can't tell you. I would love to say it's coming in a year or two, but honestly, with the way things are going, I don't know that I would have any time to pick at it. But so that is coming. Also, I'll be moving Face the Night over to Simon and Schuster next year for its 5 year anniversary. I can't believe it's fucking 5 years already.
Holy shit, yeah.
So I'm doing a quick little edit pass on that because Face the Night was literally the first thing over 5,000 words that I ever wrote. And I know, despite the awards, despite the starred reviews, I know there are a couple of small issues in there that I want to take care of. So I'm gonna just kind of do a little bit of cleanup, nothing major. We're not, tearing anything apart. We're not removing anything. It's just I want to do a little bit of cleanup. And that's coming. And then the obsolescence anthology that I edited with
Yeah.
my friend Christina, we want to do a second one of those. And so we're going to be
Right
opening up the
on.
call for that in a few months. It was supposed to be happening right about now, but the SNS move just killed that. I don't have the time. But
Yeah.
we are going to be doing a second one of those. So I'll get that won't really be my writing, although Christina and I did co-write a short story for the first one, and we will probably do something similar for the second one. Um, so that is kind of where my fiction writing is at. It's certainly not forefront, and there's like I said, there's always that little bit of like, what if I had kept with it? What if Dad FM was out 2 years ago? What if this was? But if Dad FM was out 2 years ago, it wouldn't have had Todd Keesling in it. It wouldn't have Cynthia
No,
Paleo, and
yeah.
it yeah, wouldn't have Tanya Pell because I didn't know any of those people back then.
Yeah.
So it is one of those things where it's like, well, how sad can I be about all this? Because look at the journey it's taken me on. Look at the people it's introduced me to. Look at the great stories I've been able to read and that have moved me and scared me and all these other things. So I certainly can't be salty about it, but it is one of those things where occasionally I think about how life could be different if that had changed. But yeah, so that's where I'm at with the fiction writing.
I wish people could see my face as you were explaining that book. The premise, the set, like the having people call in, have just been like my mouth has been hanging open for like the last 5 minutes. That is fan fucking tastic.
Thank you.
Whatever we need to do to get that on shelves in people's hands, I look, whatever I gotta do, let me know and I'll help you. But I also get the, like there's just not time. Like I also totally get that. But that is a brilliant fucking idea and I love it tremendously.
Thank you.
Um, just adore it to pieces. But no, man, oh, I, it's just so it's hard, really hard to put into words. But like the creativity that is just oozing from Shortwave and everything that Shortwave does and that you've created is just so phenomenal. It's so fun to talk about and like just really fun to celebrate. So I'm thrilled for the successes that have come y'all's way recently with the distribution deal and the Stephen King of it all and everything else. But nah, man, just super thrilled for you. Is there anything else though that we didn't touch upon that you may want to talk about? Nope. Okay.
I'm good, thank you. This
Okay.
has been a lot of fun.
Good. I'm very glad. But no, I mean, normally I'm like, this is where you go buy this book. It's on shelves this day from this person. But no, just anything from Shortwave. Just go to Shortwave's website, check them out. Like I said, I truly feel like there's something for everybody that you guys offer. And Alan, thank you so much for being open with your wisdom and like you do this, like I said, on the reg on social media, just sharing about the things that you learn, but sitting down for an hour and a half conversation about this stuff, super fucking cool, super helpful, and super inspiring. So just thank you so much again for making the time.
Oh yeah, no, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. And I feel like because that's the way I learned everything, I just want to pay it forward. I learned
Yeah.
from other people sharing what they knew. I don't know everything, but I know a little bit, and I'll share that little bit.
Hey man, that's the best that any of us can do, right? Like leave things better than you found them. So
Exactly.
big props to you, man. But thank you so much again, Alan.
another really, really big thank you to Alan for his time to come on and just pretty much share everything he knows about everything I asked about. It was such a lovely chat back when we recorded this, I think about a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago. And now I am recording this outro on the day after Nat Cassidy's I Know a Place comes out, which again, I know this is a focal point of this conversation, but it serves right because it was a huge release, man. You guys ate up this episode that I did with Nat. So thank you all so much for listening. It's one of my most popular episodes, I think, to date. I could not be doing all this without y'all. So obviously, huge kudos to you all for making it happen. And also a special shout out to the Patreon folks. The Discord has been popping lately. We've been having some really good discussions and some really good recommendations, a lot of encouragement. We're not just talking about books and reading, we're also talking about writing there too, which has been really, really fun and awesome. So if that's something that you're interested in, please feel free to go check out the Patreon. Like I said, it's been a really cool community that I've started to build. So really looking forward to advancing that as much as I can because I want all of you guys in on the fun if we can. I want to build this niche little corner of the internet where we're all nice and fun and supportive as the Horde community is. Thank you guys so much again. Next week I'll be back with regularly scheduled episodes, possibly a bonus episode. We're going to see how things shake out. I am a bit under the weather as we speak, but recovering as soon as possible. But yeah, that's all I have for you this week. I love you all tremendously. I wish you all well, and until next week.